so lovely and brilliant. There we go. That's the recording started. So as May said, we'll record the majority of the presentation, but then when we get to a Q&A at the end, we'll turn it off just so we can have a little bit of privacy, or if anybody has any questions that they would like answered separately, that's absolutely fine. I'll put up my email address and bits and bobs at the end. Sorry, I'm just turning my camera slightly so you can't see the mess on this shelf. I couldn't quite work out if the messy shelf was in the background. Right, so I think I will just start sharing my screen and we can get started. If you bear with me for 2 ticks. Right, so that's all there. Oh, what have I done? No, that's not what I want to be pressing. This one. There we are. Goodness me, sorry, that was more difficult than it needed to be. I'm just going to minimize myself down in this corner so that I don't have my own face looking at me while I'm speaking, because it is very off-putting, and I do apologize to everyone who has to look at it. So this is our subject for today. We're talking about attachment theory, and we're going to talk about a general overview of attachment theory and its importance in our early childhood and beyond. So for those of you who haven't met me before, this is me, I'm Karen Watson. I'm slightly more blonde in this photo. Don't let it put you off, still the same person. These are a few of the things that I do on the side. So I am a teacher. I am primary trained. I've been teaching for 9 years now. Sorry, I should say I'm on maternity leave at the moment. So if I seem like my brain has dribbled out my ear, blame the 6-month-old baby. So currently on maternity leave, generally work in ASN schools with children with complex needs. Specifically, you know, my area of expertise is autism, and yeah, just general communication needs, behavioural needs, things like that are all my bag. So these are a few of my side hustles. I have a podcast. I present on Teacher Hug Radio. For both of those, it's shows about inclusion, how we can make our classrooms really inclusive to our neurodivergent learners. And I've also written a book, this lovely pink book, Good Autism Practice for Teachers, Embracing Neurodiversity and Supporting Inclusion. And again, it's all about strategies that we can use that are generally thought of as most appropriate for our autistic pupils or ADHD pupils or dyslexic pupils, but how we can actually use them for all our pupils, and how really inclusion, that's what inclusion is. That's what's at the heart of it, is using these strategies, using them across the board for all our pupils. And you know, some children will really benefit from them, some children will pick and choose little bits, and some children won't need them. And that's okay, because they don't have to use them, but they're there. And my kind of link in with music is I play the flute and I pretend to play the saxophone. I know what almost all the buttons do. Not to get a high D though, as I established last week. So I play with the Garnet Valley Community Band just now, which is how I know May as well, as been through school with her. And you know, I love music. It's a real passion of mine. It's more than a hobby for me. And I really appreciate how much the arts and my music teachers did for me throughout my school life. They gave me a source of self-esteem that I didn't get anywhere else. I'm dyslexic, so had my fair share of issues at school and through university. And music's always been something that's been a real positive in my life and a real self-esteem booster. So I really appreciate how much the arts has to offer our children. And as well as a subject and an entity in its own right, it can give some of our children that boost that they need, that they maybe don't access anywhere else in the curriculum, and it can really take them on and bolster them throughout their whole school experience. So this is what we'll cover today, and I know it looks like loads and loads and loads of slides, but most of them are a little bit of information, a little paragraph here, a little piece of information here, a little thing to think about here. And I'm not going to read through all of these because we'll come back to them all later. And if you've heard me speak before, I don't like just reading what's on the slide because I think that's a bit of an insult to your intelligence, you know. One thing I wanted to say to start was, with attachment theory, just keep in mind that this is a theory. There are lots of theories. There are lots of theories in education. There are lots of theories elsewhere. And we don't have to drop everything and grab onto a theory. You know, it's got some excellent points, but as you can see, second to last bullet point, we have controversies. There are some controversies to this theory. I think it's well worth having an overview of and well worth having an awareness of, but I wouldn't, it's not a drop everything and follow this strategy. You know, some of the things that I preach about, like visuals. So I go on and on and on about visuals, and I go on and on about positive relationships. And those are two things that I would consider a drop everything and do this. You know, if you're only going to do two things as a teacher, as an educator, there goes the brain melt. It would, for me, it's visuals and positive relationships. Those two things are the core of my practice. I wouldn't say attachment theory is a core thing in my practice. It's something that I'm aware of, and it's something that I take into consideration, and it's something that I do think about, and I do, you know, pay attention to, but it's not something that I would drop everything and focus on. So I hope that makes sense. I just don't want anyone to sort of listen to this and think, oh my goodness, I can't do this. I need to focus on this. I'm not a psychologist. I can't do this. Or what I did when I first sort of read into attachment theory and thought, oh my goodness, I'm such a terrible parent. So please do not think that. You are not a terrible parent. You're not a terrible teacher. You're not a terrible educator. And I said it right that time. So let's get started with what is attachment. So it's an emotional bond with another person. Attachment theory proposes that your initial relationships with a primary caregiver dictate and pave the way for your relationships throughout life. So throughout a child's life, throughout their life as a young adult, throughout their life as an adult. It's all dictated by those relationships with the primary caregiver when they're a baby. So historically, a baby who forms a strong attachment to their primary caregiver and stays close to them and is nurtured by them, that baby survives. So we're thinking back to sort of caveman era. If you're a baby, you need to stay close to your primary caregiver or you're not going to survive very long. So those sort of innate things are still inbuilt within us. And that child, they need to be protected, they need to be fed, and they need to be nurtured, essentially. So your primary components of attachment are nurture and responsiveness. So responsiveness to care needs, responsiveness to hunger cues, all those kind of things. So we're really thinking just now of that tiny baby stage. And we'll go on in a few minutes to talk about the different sort of attachment stages within babyhood and within early childhood. But we really are focusing on that very early stage. And that's going to be throughout this presentation. So we're thinking about the child we have in front of us now, but we're taking it back to those very early attachment, those very early childhood experiences, and whether they were positive or whether they were not so positive. And then we'll look at how we can work with that child now and how we can help mend those broken attachments and those broken relationships. So what are the foundations of attachment? So I've got this little visual up here that we'll talk through in a minute, but I just wanted to flick through a few points first. So attachment's an internal representation of our world. So all of our relationship experiences have its place in our mind. They all have their own place in the mind. And how we interpret those directly impacts how we behave in relationships with others. So according to the initial sort of founder of attachment theory, his name was John Bowlby, there are 4 categories of attachment, and we'll come on to those in a minute. But then also there's a psychologist named Patricia Crittenden who broke down these categories further and really established how those early relationships with caregivers dictate those future relationships. So there are a few different sort of key players here. And it's important to know that this is all research that's been done in the past, and the past few years have certainly been more critical of attachment theory if you go and do some Googling and some reading. So we're going to go back to the original theory, and then we're going to sort of work our way through to any criticisms. It really is, attachment's a really complex situation. So do be wary of labeling a child with an attachment style and sticking to that label. It's better to have, as I say, an awareness, base your teaching on different attachment styles, and avoiding putting a child in a distinct category. So when this was first theorised, children were placed in distinct categories. It was very individual and they couldn't move categories. They couldn't grow, they couldn't progress. And but they're not totally individualized. It's a functional product of our past and attachment style. And it's those past, present, and future relationships. And it's also worth noting that there are individuals who can't be categorized. They don't fit into any of those categories. They can't be labeled as such. It's very rare, but there are children and individuals who are very difficult to categorize. Early learning is essential. It's essential in our learning how to be close to another human being. And this is really learned in the first 18 months of life. This forms the idea of trust and works to build a foundation for future relationships. And ultimately, the way you relate to others and the way you learn to be around others is formed at that very, very young age. It's a sort of adaptive strategy, as I say, to protect ourselves from danger. It's a mean to protect ourselves by forming the correct bonds. I said correct in inverted commas there. Your sort of standard correct relationship bonds. And we initially protect ourselves by having the primary caregiver close to us. But if that caregiver has a punitive approach to us, then we learn to stop complaining in order to keep them close. So it's similar to the cry it out method that used to be used a lot with babies. Now, this is a very controversial method. I have absolutely no judgment to anyone who's used the cry out method. I am not meaning to place judgment on anyone just now, but essentially, if we're leaving a baby to cry, they learn that crying is pointless and they don't do it anymore. So yes, that's a good thing. Baby's no longer crying. But the reason that they're not crying is that they know crying won't ensure their needs are met. So they stop wasting precious energy on it. Babies are so incredibly adaptive to the circumstances. So if a caregiver's not giving attention when they cry, or perhaps behaving in a negative way when they cry through anger, the baby will adapt and not cry in order to keep that caregiver close by. So if baby cries and primary caregiver is angry with them, shows a negative emotion, baby will stop doing that in order to keep the caregiver close and to keep them happy. So I'm using the term caregiver here. I sort of use it interchangeably with parent, just because I want to be inclusive of any primary caregiver that may be in a child's life. They may be in foster care. There's a lot of different situations. I don't want to be exclusive of any of them. So that's why I'm using caregiver, carer, parent, all sort of interchangeably. I think generally the primary caregiver would be the mother, if that's the person who's off on parental leave, but we don't want to exclude, there might be a father who's the primary caregiver, there might be someone else who's a primary caregiver. So just to give a little bit of background on why I'm using that terminology. So thinking about those adaptations, if from a young age we have to adapt to our relationships and surroundings, it distorts our environment and it changes our reality. And this can directly contribute to mental health problems later in life, as the reality is so distorted that we can no longer make sense of the world. So we have a little look at this flow chart now. We've got the primary carer's behaviour towards a child, which directly feeds into the child's working model of themselves, how they feel, how they react, how they see themselves in relation to others. And then we can see how different things will lead to different outcomes for that child. So if they feel positive, if they feel loved, then they feel secure. If they feel unloved and rejected, they are avoidant. If they feel angry and confused, they can become resistant to relationships. So you've got secure relationships, avoidant relationships, and resistant relationships here. So let's now have a think about the 4 categories of attachment theory. So there are 4 different attachment styles, if you like. They are, and my PowerPoint, there we go. It's just taking a wee minute to catch up with us there. There we are, that's it now. So first we have ambivalent insecure. So this is an inconsistent parent who might be sometimes warm to the child, sometimes reliable with the child. And this creates a huge amount of anxiety for that baby or child. Essentially, the child's constantly thinking, what's the parent going to be doing? Will they be there at pickup time? Will they be happy? And their survival depends on this. So they're extremely anxious and extremely preoccupied with these thoughts. This can feel like the caregiver's unattainable, and the survival of the child is absolutely threatened by this because their caregiver is not available to them when they need them. The The child really, they're not sure where they stand, so they're constantly looking for signals of acceptance or rejection, and they're constantly aspiring to be what they perceive someone wants. So you may know adults like this, you may know young adults like this, you may know children like this. They want to be what you want them to be. You know, that's how they get their self-esteem, because they're trying to be what they think you need them to be. They're not secure in themselves. They're not secure in their own personality. They're not secure that they are enough and they are needed and they are respected for being themselves. And that comes from that ambivalent, insecure attachment style. So next we have avoidant insecure. So this child, if they're separated from their caregiver, don't seem that bothered. They don't seem that excited when the caregiver returns. They don't seem to be that upset when the caregiver leaves. And this child has internalized that belief that they can't rely on anybody. They will not attempt to seek out their primary caregiver. They may display quite defensive behaviours. They might avoid eye contact or become very quiet in case they potentially trigger a punitive response from the parent. Now, this thankfully is very rare. This is not a common one. But it's quite upsetting to think of a child who won't even make eye contact with the parent out of fear of their response. Then we've got our disorganized insecure. So this is a mixed response. So the child might show a combination of seeking and avoidant behavior towards their caregiver. And this is due to an inconsistent approach from the caregiver. You know, they may sometimes be warm, they may sometimes be reliable, and they may sometimes not. They may be a figure of comfort and fear. And imagine having to rely on someone that you're also a bit scared of. So this is your disorganized attachment. This form of attachment can easily lead to internalizing relationships and reactions in a form of creating your own reality. And then it becomes difficult to distinguish reality from fantasy. And it can be a method of retreating into your own chaos as a child's unable to deal with the world as it is. And as you can imagine, this can also lead to so many mental health issues in the future, where someone may be unable to distinguish between reality and the reality they've constructed. Now, finally, we have secure attachment, which thankfully is the most common style of attachment. So this is a child who they actively seek and enjoy the proximity of the primary caregiver. They show signs of distress when they leave, but ultimately they know and they trust that they're going to come back. The trust is there. And the child knows that the caregiver is responsive to their needs. So they're comfortable seeking reassurance. And although they may be upset, they know the caregiver will return and they know that they'll get a cuddle. They know that they'll be fed. And as I say, this is thankfully the most common style. So please don't be scared by all the negativity that preceded it. So we have stages of attachment. Your child's born, and the first 1,000 days are really key to the child's development, relationships, and future prospects. So from 3 weeks old, a baby can distinguish its primary caregiver's features distinct from other people. They get to know their smell, their touch. But it takes about 6 months for a proper attachment to form. And this consists of highs and lows. For example, baby learns that the primary caregiver will go away, but it learns they will also come back. An attachment can exist without love as such. It's based on relationship and trust. So the child goes through a number of attachment stages in the first year to year and a half of life. And what exactly does that look like? So the pre-attachment stage can last anywhere from 6 weeks to 3 months, where the baby is not showing a clear attachment to that primary caregiver. Between 6 weeks and about 7 months, indiscriminate attachment occurs, where the baby shows recognition and preference for a primary and secondary caregiver. So in a typical, 2.4 children family, this would be the mother and the father. The two parents that are there, perhaps they have 2 mothers, 2 fathers, whatever 2 adults are the primary and secondary caregivers in that child's life. It could be a parent and a grandparent, depending on the setup of the home. Okay, we've got to be open to any kind of home setup. It's not your standard, historically standard family. At about 7 months, discriminate attachment occurs. So the baby will show a clear preference for the primary caregiver. This is when things like separation anxiety come in. And a lot of primary caregivers can find this very difficult, because typically this is the age that a baby might be starting nursery or starting to go to some form of childcare if the parent's going back to work from parental leave. And This can be a really key stage for that separation anxiety. They know their primary caregiver, they want to be with their primary caregiver, and nobody else will do at that point. And it's a real key stage of attachment. You know, all children, all babies go through this stage, and it's an interesting one. It can be very tricky with all the separation and the anxiety that goes around that. And then at around 10 months, multiple attachment occurs when a child begins to show bonds with other key caregivers in their life, for example, extended family. So grandparents, aunts and uncles, siblings, that sort of wider family circle, whatever that might look like for a particular family. And this shows just how important those early relationships are, and how modeling positive early relationships can be really key to those lifelong relationships. So if we get it right at that early stage, then that child is going to have such an easier time building those relationships and connecting with other people, bonding with other people as they age. So we're going to have a quick look at patterns of attachment now. Now, I just love this visual. So the credit is at the bottom. If you have a look at Kristen Ryan's Twitter, it is incredible. She does the most beautiful illustrations of all sorts of different things, but I love this one about co-regulation, and it ties into what we're going to talk about shortly. So thinking about the patterns of attachment is really important as a child matures into adulthood. A secure attachment gives them the confidence to be the whole of who they are. It's the security to show a wide range of emotions and not have to hide certain parts of themselves for fear of rejection. If you've got a consistent person who's able to help you co-regulate and soothe, this gives excellent grounding for self-regulation and self-soothing. So this is where this visual comes in. You know, if you have someone who is reliable and calm when you are feeling that storm, and they're able to step in, and you have that trust and that positive relationship with them and that bond, then that is when you're able to co-regulate. And we know that in order to self-regulate, a child first needs to co-regulate. They need that model to them. But to do that, they need someone that they feel really safe with, and they feel safe to show different emotions. Because if you imagine a child who is anything other than secure attachment, they may be scared to show different emotions because they don't know how predictable their primary caregiver is going to be in that situation. Are they going to outright reject them for showing emotion? Are they going to show a negative response? Are they going to be punitive about it? They just don't know. And it's that unreliability and that unpredictability that really leaves that child quite emotionally unstable, and they don't have a good grounding for that. But this is something that we can take and we can work on in schools, because obviously we can't, as a teacher, especially a secondary teacher, we've got no input in that child's early life in the first 18 months, you know. And it's really looking at what can we do now to help with that. And emotional literacy is something that we can do, but we will come back to that later. I'll stop, not get ahead of myself too much. So another thing is having the tools to be able to get the help to self-regulate from someone else. So having the confidence to ask, knowing who they can ask for help, and giving consistent care offers the child a chance to mirror skills and then learn them for themselves. And validating how that child feels, labeling their emotions, and allowing them to really feel those feelings in a safe place offers them a chance to see things for how they are. They don't have to change their reality to make it less scary, or make themselves and their reactions smaller to meet supposed expectations. And remember that attachment patterns don't need to be fixed. Just because a child experiences a particular style, it doesn't mean they'll also apply that style to their parenting. So really the input we can deliver in school is to help a child break a pattern of attachment. They can break those patterns that they experience as a child, and we can give them the skills to then be able to form secure attachments and be able to say, no, do you know what? This is what happened to me when I was little, and that's not going to happen to a child I might have in the future, or to someone that I want to build a relationship with. So if you're interested in looking at patterns of attachment further, I'd recommend looking up the dynamic maturational model. We don't have time to go into it just now, unfortunately. It's something by Patricia Crittenden, who I mentioned earlier. And it's worth a little read at a later date, but it does take a little bit of brain space and a little bit of sort of reading. If you just Google it, you get this lovely colourful wheel that makes very little sense. So you do need to do a little bit of background reading on it. So we don't unfortunately have time to go into it today, but the dynamic maturational model, if you have a spare 15 minutes. I was going to say 5 and I thought that's a total lie. So we're just going to link to, sorry, I was just having a wee drink there. Just having a wee link here to sense of self and theory of mind. So as it says, to develop quality theory of mind, we must initially have quality attachment. So theory of mind develops from your sense of self and the quality of that early attachment. If we have a strong sense of self, it helps us feel consistent and grounded. Theory of mind is the initial attribution of mental states to others. It develops throughout childhood and is essentially a child becoming aware that another person's thought processes and mental awareness are different from their own. So to develop that theory of mind, as we say, we must initially have quality attachment. So a child must be able to attribute their own mental awareness, their own thought process, their own feelings, in order to understand that other people have differing ones. So quantity versus quality. Key factors that influence attachment are quality and opportunity. So when it comes to one-to-one time with the primary caregiver, quality always trumps quantity. So spending some real quality time validating emotions and discussing, for example, a separation is much more important than just always being there. When a caregiver is there and they want to be mirroring and connecting with the child. And when the carer responds quickly and consistently, the child learns to depend on them and learns that they're reliable. So for example, if you have a parent who works long hours and you have a small child who struggles with that separation, you know, the quantity of time the parent's spending in the home spending with that child is perhaps not going to be high. Perhaps they work night shifts and the child is out at nursery, out in childcare during the day. They maybe don't get to spend that much time with them, but the time they do spend can be spent building that nice relationship, having that quality time, really tuning in one-on-one to that child and discussing that separation, saying, I have to go to work now, but I'll come back. I'm coming back. I always come back. And when I come back, I'll come into your room if you're asleep and give you a wee cuddle, you know, and then tomorrow when you wake up, I'll be there. And it's reassuring them that yes, there's that separation, but you're coming back, you're going to be there, you're going to be reliable, you're going to be predictable and consistent for them. And that is important. You know, just because someone is working long hours, someone's not in the house, someone's not with the child, it doesn't mean that they can't have that secure attachment with the child. So a healthy attachment. So John Bowlby, who we spoke about earlier when we talked about attachment styles, he said there were 3 things which are going to promote healthy attachment. So the first is consistency, as I've said. I think I've said that word about 20 times already, so it's nice to have that validated. This is the parent behaving in a consistent manner. They're predictable with their behaviours and when they show up for the child. You can guess their reaction to a particular situation. There's no surprises with their reactions. They are consistent in their parenting. Inconsistent behaviour is confusing for a child and again can lead to behaviours such as changing their reactions, making themselves smaller and insignificant, and hiding their emotions because they're scared of provoking that inconsistency. Reliability, so this is knowing that when a parent leaves or puts you down, they will come back and they will pick me up. A baby knows that if they cry, the caregiver will come. You know, they will feed them, they will cuddle them, they will be there and meet their needs. And warmth, that a child's treated with warmth and care. It's really as simple as that. So since Bowlby's sort of chat about this, we have discovered a bit more about bonding, including this horribly named concept that I was reading about called mentalization, which just sounds horrendous, but the concept behind it makes sense. I'll explain. So it's the ability to reflect on what you're feeling in yourself and start to work out what someone else is feeling. And doesn't that link back nicely to your theory of mind? It really is a skill to be able to name what's going on within ourselves. And that's all part of teaching emotional literacy. So the capacity to know what one's feeling when they're feeling it is a really powerful indicator of a quality attachment. So the other side of the coin, which is a bit more grim, unhealthy attachment. So with an insecure attachment, defensive strategies are employed, which are designed to maintain the contact with the primary caregiver, who might be unreliable or rejecting. So the parent could be functional, but not have warmth, for example. The child might have a strong bond with items or things rather than people. They may find it easier to bond with, technology, or to rely on that rather than relying on a parent or a caregiver. So avoidant, for example, this is an exemplar. What does that look like? So the caregiver is rebuffing contact, whether that be physical contact or crying. The child realizes they can't rely on that caregiver, and the child pushes down their own need for connection. This child can interpret others as feeling needy, as they may be more forthcoming with their own needs and wants. And this creates conflict, as they might interpret that other person as needy. And an avoidant person, they'll believe that nobody really cares about them. And they'll interpret anyone trying to be needy, to create a bond, to create a relationship, they'll interpret that as being a bit much, and it'll be too much for them. They won't be able to manage. And I think we've all met a child like that. There's a teenager who is suspicious of anyone who wants to try and get close to them because they think, well, why would they want to get close to me? I'm not worth it. I'm not worth their time and energy. And it's really sad, but I can think back on my career and I can think of 2 children in particular that I think this just hits them on the head. They were so distrustful of anyone who wanted to get close to them. And now that I know about attachment theory, I know that that's likely because of experiences they had in early childhood. And, there was things that I could have done differently with those children, that I say, since learning more about attachment theory and since being able to provide some training on it, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? But I think we can all think of a child that, this would maybe relate to. So if a child doesn't have a secure relationship with their caregiver, they will unconsciously continue to seek it out in other relationships, or they may unconsciously continue to seek it out in other relationships. And this is not a healthy basis for a relationship, trying to replace that caregiver. As a baby, creating that secure attachment doesn't take much effort. Look cute, give them a few smiles. It's easy. As a young adult, trying to create that initial relationship is almost impossible. Teenagers don't look cute. I'm sure teenagers look very cute, but it's very different from a baby building that relationship than a teenager trying to jump in and try and build that relationship at a later date. And now my computer has decided it doesn't want to work again. Oh, here we go. There we are. So we've got a spectrum of childhood experience. We've got children who are looked after, children who are care experienced. We might have children whose parents have shown different attachment styles because of mental health issues, their own upbringing, their personalities. There's so many different homes our children are coming from. And we can't assume they're not suffering because of their attachment style because they come from a good home in inverted commas, or they seem well adjusted. A child might just be exceptionally good at hiding their anger or hiding their anxiety, masking their true emotions in order to have that proximity to other people. This is not a calm, happy, regulated child, even though they seem calm and quiet. Alternatively, if a child's around a parent who's reducing themselves in order to maintain a relationship, they may become more of a class clown role in order to lift that parent's spirits. So we're not just thinking about the children that we're working with and their initial experiences, but the initial experiences of their parents as well. And when we think about generational differences in bringing up children, there are going to be some attachment issues there. Every generation brings new knowledge, new experiences, and new theories. And it's very difficult to break patterns, So a child who is living with someone who is shrinking to fit maybe a partner's expectation, to try and manage their partner's anger, if a child is living with that, they may become quite loud, quite boisterous, quite jokey, to try and lift that caregiver's spirits because they want to make them feel better. They want to make them laugh. They want to make them feel something. And that can quickly become a role for a child, and it becomes almost compulsive. So in different areas of their life, they may bring that into school and become that jokey, silly character in class as well. But again, it's actually a child suffering, and they're trying to change their reality to fit in and to help someone else. So how can we work with attachment theory to improve teaching? So I've tried to boil it down to two key things. Now, bear with me on the mindfulness. So emotional literacy, if you've heard me before, I'm not going to repeat myself because I do go on about it a lot, but you know, we want to work on that positive relationship with a child. We want to be a positive figure in their life. We want to learn about them. We want to build trust. We want to build respect, and we want to build a relationship with them. And then once we've done that, we can start labeling emotions for them. We can start validating their emotions by labeling them. I see you're feeling angry today. And then once we've started labeling them, we're validating them. And then we can teach strategies on how to manage those emotions. And for some children, you know, it might just be the negative emotions that they have difficulty with their anger, with anxiety. But some children may also have real difficulties in processing positive emotions, because if they don't have a reliable, consistent caregiver producing a predictable response, they don't know what will happen if they're really happy about something, if they're really excited. They may perceive that as a negative emotion because it's coming out of their little box, if you see what I mean. So it's all about labeling these things, and it's okay to be excited. It's okay to be angry. It's not okay to throw chairs, but it's okay to be angry, you know? And there's different ways that we can deal with that, and we can process that, and we can get that out of our system. And it's about validating it. And, you know, by labeling it, we're making the first steps in showing a child that, yes, your emotion's valid, and that's okay. And you're allowed to feel these things, you know? You don't have to keep them to yourself for fear of my reaction. And, you know, we are very much co-regulating at that point. We're being non-judgmental, and we're just giving that child the tools to come out and be who they are and be their whole personality. Mindfulness, it's about developing that self-awareness so that you can work on your sense of self, your self-esteem, and your theory of mind. So thinking about how we think and how everyone else thinks. Now, mindfulness is a concept that is thrown about very loosely these days. Mindfulness is not a colouring in sheet. It's not it's a lovely thing to do, but it's not about giving some colouring in opportunities and giving that quiet time. It's a real process. And, you know, there's lots of lovely training opportunities on mindfulness. I am not qualified as a mindfulness coach. I don't want to have anyone under any sort of misinterpretations there, but there's a lot more to it than we are doing at the moment. I think, you know, we're kind of paying lip service to mindfulness, but there's so many layers to it, and it's something that is really worth diving into, doing a bit of research on, and really thinking how you can incorporate that within your practice. And it ties in really nicely with your emotional literacy. You know, that could be a focus, a topic that you're doing with your class. It can something, a thread that just runs through everything that you do. You know, if you only have a child for a music lesson for 20 minutes in a week, you know, you're not going to be spending half of that talking about emotional literacy and talking about mindfulness, but a quick, you know, how are you feeling today when they come in the door, you know, and speaking about it. And if they, you know, generally fine, grunt, you know, but maybe, just maybe, one day, if they have a little problem or they're not feeling great, you'll be the person they open up to. And how wonderful would that be to know that you are that chosen person for the child? You've built that positive relationship. If you are an instrumental instructor, for example, that might be the best part of that child's week, you know, going to their music lesson. So to know that their instructor is there for them and is open to talking about emotions, you know, that's a really wonderful thing. And that's a wonderful place that we can provide for a child. Down to the controversies. So always good. Oh, sorry, gone too far. I thought I had more controversy. So attachment, if you Google it and you look up, you know, is attachment outdated? That's what I put into Google just to see what happened. And, you know, it's not outdated, but some aspects of it are a little bit more narrow than perhaps we would consider nowadays. So, you know, it's not a one size fits all. People can have different attachments to different caregivers, and it's not, this can complicate a sort of linear attachment theory. So it's not just this nice, lovely line where you fit here and you fit here. It can be a bit more complicated than that, and that's okay. And that's why I think having an awareness of it and taking into consideration within our practice, but not becoming too focused and too rigid on the technicalities of it. So not thinking, oh, I have this child, which box do they fit into? Just not thinking, right, I have a child who's displaying signs of, you know, there might be possible attachment issues there, and how can I overall try and improve the environment for this child and try and improve their experiences. It's not an environmental construct, so nervous parents can be left doubting their own abilities after reading about attachment theory. And I said that before, I was honest about that. I read it and thought, oh my goodness, I am a terrible, terrible parent. I have broken my children. And I haven't, like, they're fine. You know, we have secure attachments. I hope, I like to think, but you know, there are some days that you think, oh, I displayed this tendency, or I was a bit more unreliable, or I did this. And people, even the most confident of parents, will pick holes in what they're doing based on what they read. And it's not about that. It's not about judging anyone. It's not about trying to bring people up to scratch. It's not about that. You know, that's not our job. And there are psychologists, there are doctors, there are social workers who are much more equipped to deal with the family situation overall. We're dealing with the child in front of us. And, you know, there's a lot of expectation on teachers these days. There's a lot of work on teachers these days. And yes, we have to be considerate of that family environment, but it doesn't all fall on your shoulders. There's a whole team of people who are equipped and available to help deal with a problem or a situation. So don't feel that it's all on you. And please don't feel that you're a terrible parent, because I guarantee you're not. And the other thing is attachment theory, it doesn't consider a lot of external factors. So it doesn't consider things like social class, ethnicity, culture, economic factors, or even someone's temperament. You know, it doesn't consider personality. So it's just something to think about when you are thinking about attachment theory, that there are places where it's lacking. It's not a one size fits all, and it's not a solution to all your problems. It's just another tool that we can use, and it's another strategy that we can add into what we're already doing. So in summary, I would, as I've been saying throughout, you know, take note of attachment styles, but don't overhaul your entire practice to label children, divide and conquer. You know, I know a lot of strategies I use are an all-in process, but I would approach this one with a little bit of caution. So take some time to reflect, do your own reading, and think about what bits of this approach will really work for your learners. And I think attachment theory for me is about having that awareness, linking it to my knowledge of trauma-informed practice, which I did a little training on before and is available on the MEPG website if you want to take a wee look back, because it all links in so closely with trauma-informed practice. And then most importantly, keeping an open mind about the young person in front of me. So strategies that we discussed, including emotional literacy and mindfulness, they're useful for a multitude of circumstances and situations. And combining those with an awareness of attachment can be incredibly beneficial for the young people in our care and our service. It's vital to acknowledge how these early experiences form our young people, and knowing the ins and outs of attachment theory can really give us an overview on how some behaviours and some personalities can present. So again, it's all of that behaviour is communication, isn't it? And I know that's been dragged through the mud a little bit on the social media website with the bird on it, which we shall not say its name. You know, behaviour is communication, and it might not be a positive communication, but it's trying to communicate a need or a want or something, you know. And I think attachment theory all feeds into that as well, because the way a child's communicating, it might not be communicating a need from right now. It may be communicating a historical need that they had for connection and for relationships and for bonding. And there's nothing we can do about what happened to a child 10, 15 years ago. But there are things we can do now. And there are steps that we can take now to help that child accept who they are. And as I say, if it's a child who's reducing themselves, to bring them out and, you know, bring out their personality. And I think music and the arts is a wonderful place for that, because, you know, as I said at the start, it can be somewhere that children feel secure, they get a lot of self-esteem that they maybe don't get elsewhere in their school experience. And, you know, it just might be that, you know, through the magic of music and the arts, we form that relationship with a child which makes them feel open and available for that kind of relationship as well, and really helps them come out of their shell. So don't be surprised if you do have young people who come to you over anyone else, because really, I don't think we can underestimate the power of our music classes. So as always, you're doing a great job. Thank you so much for being here. I know this is a really hard time for teachers just now, and you know, even though I'm on mat leave, I'm there with you, you know, supporting, and I know things are very difficult. So yeah, thank you so much for being here. And here are my contact details. So I'll just leave them up for a wee second just now, so that they'll be on the recording at the end as well. And then what we'll do is I will stop sharing my screen. We will stop recording. And if anyone's got any wee questions that I can answer, you can either speak or you can pop them in the chat box, whichever's easier for yourself. And if MD goes away and thinks, what was she talking about? That was absolute nonsense. Please do email me with any questions you have later, or get in touch on one of my socials or something, because, you know, this isn't me cutting everything off, you know. Quite happy to take questions later or to chat if anybody's got any questions, or if you have any alternative viewpoints as well, because I know this can be a slightly controversial topic. So I will stop sharing my screen. I'm going to pop back to the lovely face instead. So if we're all right to